My roommate brought bed bugs into our apartment for the second time in 2 years, and now she wants me to pay half of a $1,000 extermination bill for a problem I didn't cause. When I refused, she called me selfish and heartless. But what happened next made me realize I was dealing with someone far more toxic than any infestation. Hi, I'm Bronwyn, I'm 24 years old, and I never thought I'd be posting on Reddit about bugs ruining my life. But here we are, and honestly, I need to know if I'm the crazy one in this situation because my roommate has me questioning my own sanity. Let me take you back to how this whole nightmare began. 2 years ago, I was fresh out of college and desperately searching for affordable housing in Portland. The rental market was absolutely brutal, and I was running out of options when I found Theodora's posting on Craigslist. She was 23 then, seemed responsible, and the apartment was perfect, a cozy 2-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood with reasonable rent that we could split evenly. When we met for coffee to discuss the arrangement, Theodora seemed like the ideal roommate. She was studying social work, passionate about helping others, and had this infectious energy about making a difference in the world. I really want to work with homeless populations, she told me that day, stirring sugar into her latte with genuine enthusiasm. There's so much need out there, and I feel like I can really make an impact. I remember thinking how admirable that was. Here was someone who wanted to dedicate her life to helping society's most vulnerable people. How could I not respect that? We shook hands that afternoon, and I thought I'd found not just a roommate, but potentially a lifelong friend. The first few months living with Theodora were honestly wonderful. She was funny, considerate about shared spaces, and always willing to split household duties fairly. We'd watch Netflix together on weekends, cook elaborate meals when we both had time, and she'd tell me stories about her internship at a local shelter. Her work seemed challenging but rewarding, and I genuinely admired her dedication. She'd come home exhausted but fulfilled, talking about the progress she was making with different clients and the small victories that kept her motivated. Today, I helped Marcus find temporary housing, she'd say, collapsing onto our second-hand couch with a tired but satisfied smile. It's not much, but it's a step up from the streets. I loved hearing these stories. It made me feel like I was living with someone who was actually making the world a better place, even if I was just working my boring entry-level marketing job. Our apartment became this little sanctuary where we could decompress from our respective worlds. Theodora would share the emotional weight of her work, and I'd listen and offer support however I could. We had this rhythm going, this comfortable domestic partnership that felt sustainable and healthy. I thought we'd easily make it through our lease and probably renew for another year. But around month 6, I started noticing some things that made me uncomfortable, though I tried to rationalize them away at first. Theodora's personal hygiene habits were becoming more and more questionable. She'd leave dirty clothes piled in her room for weeks, rarely cleaned her bathroom, and I noticed a strange smell starting to emanate from her space. When I gently brought it up, she'd laugh it off and promise to do better, but nothing really changed. I've just been so busy with work, she'd say, which seemed reasonable enough. Social work was demanding, and I didn't want to be the uptight roommate who policed cleanliness. But the smell got worse, and I started seeing small insects occasionally in our shared bathroom. When I mentioned it, Theodora shrugged and said it was probably just the old building's plumbing attracting bugs. Then came the incident that should have been my first major red flag. I was getting ready for work one morning when I felt something crawling in my hair. I reached up instinctively and found a small, moving creature. My blood ran cold as I realized what it was, a louse. I ran to the bathroom mirror and started frantically examining my scalp, finding several more of the disgusting creatures nestled in my hair. Theodora! I called out, my voice probably higher than intended. She emerged from her room looking confused until I explained what I'd found. Her face went pale, and she immediately started checking her own hair. Sure enough, she was infested too, but much worse than me. It was clear this had been going on for a while in her case. Oh God, I'm so sorry, she said, looking genuinely mortified. I had no idea. I've been itching lately, but I thought it was just dry scalp. The next few hours were absolutely humiliating for both of us. We had to call in sick to work, drive to the pharmacy for special shampoo, and spend our entire day washing every piece of fabric in the apartment with scalding hot water. The process was emotionally traumatic. Here I was, a grown woman dealing with lice like I was back in elementary school. I felt dirty, embarrassed, and frankly violated. But Theodora seemed even more upset than I was, crying as we bagged up potentially contaminated items. This has never happened before, she kept saying. I'm usually so careful. She insisted on paying for all the treatment products and even offered to cover my lost wages from the sick day. This is completely my fault, she said, and I appreciated her taking responsibility. We got through it together, and while it was awful, I figured it was just one of those unfortunate things that happens when you live with someone who works closely with people experiencing homelessness. These populations often struggle with hygiene due to lack of resources, so exposure to parasites was an occupational hazard for Theodora. After the lice incident, things went back to normal for several months. Theodora seemed to take more care with her personal hygiene, and I thought maybe the experience had been a wake-up call for her. We never talked about it again, both of us probably too embarrassed to bring it up. I convinced myself it was an isolated incident and that we'd learned from it. But now, as I'm sitting here typing this story, I realize that I should have seen the pattern forming. Theodora's room remained consistently messy, she still had questionable hygiene habits, and I occasionally noticed new strange smells or odd insects around the apartment. I kept telling myself these were minor issues that came with the territory of her job, and that I should be more understanding and supportive. Last month, everything came crashing down again, but this time it was so much worse. I was leaving for work when I noticed Theodora standing next to her car in our parking garage, looking distressed and talking rapidly on her phone. She was gesturing frantically at her vehicle, and I could hear fragments of her conversation about bites and infestation and emergency appointment. I walked over to see if she needed help, and that's when I saw them. Small, dark reddish-brown insects crawling across the seats of her car. Even from a distance, I knew exactly what they were because I'd seen enough horror stories online. Bed bugs. My stomach dropped as the implications hit me immediately. Theodora, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice calm. Are those bed bugs in your car? She turned to me with tears in her eyes and nodded miserably. I've been getting these weird bites for the past few weeks, she said. I thought maybe it was mosquitoes or something, but then yesterday I actually saw one crawling on my dashboard. I felt that familiar feeling of violation and disgust washing over me, but this time it was accompanied by a growing anger. This was happening again. After everything we'd been through with the lice, here we were dealing with another infestation that had originated from her work environment. Have you checked your room? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. She shook her head quickly, maybe too quickly. I'm sure they're just in the car, she said. I probably picked them up from a client's belongings or something. It's contained to the vehicle. But even as she said it, I could tell she wasn't convinced. There was something in her voice, an uncertainty that made me realize she suspected the problem was bigger than she was admitting. I spent that entire workday distracted and anxious, dreading what I might find when I got home. When I returned that evening, Theodora was sitting on our couch looking absolutely miserable. I called a pest control company, she said without looking up. They're coming tomorrow morning to do an inspection. I sat down across from her, maintaining some distance instinctively. Did you check your room? I asked again. This time she nodded slowly. I found a few in my bed, she admitted quietly. But I'm sure they haven't spread anywhere else. I've been keeping my door closed, and I haven't seen any in the common areas. I wanted to believe her, but I also knew that bed bugs are notorious for spreading quickly through apartments. I spent that night barely sleeping, constantly feeling phantom crawling sensations and checking my own bed obsessively. Every little tickle or itch sent me into a panic. The next morning, 2 technicians from Apex Pest Control arrived to do the inspection. They were professional and thorough, spending over an hour examining every room, piece of furniture, and potential hiding spot. I followed them around nervously, watching as they used flashlights and magnifying glasses to search for evidence of bugs. The lead technician, a middle-aged man named Gary, delivered his findings with clinical detachment. The infestation is primarily concentrated in the bedroom and the vehicle, he explained, consulting his clipboard. We found live bugs, eggs, and fecal staining in the mattress, bed frame, and several pieces of clothing. The car has a significant population as well. What about the rest of the apartment? I asked, dreading the answer. Gary shook his head. We didn't find any evidence of bugs in the living room, kitchen, bathroom, or the other bedroom. No live bugs, no fecal matter, no shed skins. It appears the infestation hasn't spread beyond the infected areas yet. I felt a massive wave of relief wash over me. My space was clean. My belongings were safe. This was Theodora's problem, not mine. But then Gary continued with his recommendation, and everything changed. However, he said, we strongly recommend treating the entire unit as a preventative measure. Bed bugs are excellent hitchhikers, and it's very difficult to contain an infestation to just one room in a shared living space. Even if we don't see evidence now, there could be bugs that haven't established visible colonies yet. Theodora immediately latched onto this recommendation. See, she said, looking at me with desperate eyes. They want to treat the whole apartment. That means we both need this service. Gary went on to explain that the comprehensive treatment would cost $1,000, which would include multiple visits, heat treatment, and chemical applications. After the technicians left, Theodora and I sat in our living room in tense silence for several minutes. Finally, she spoke up. So, we'll split the cost 50-50, right? It's only fair since they're treating both of our spaces. I stared at her in disbelief. Theodora, they literally just told us that the bugs are only in your room and your car. My space is completely clean. Why should I pay for a problem I didn't cause and that doesn't affect me? Her face flushed with frustration. But they recommended treating the whole apartment. What if the bugs spread to your room later? Then we'll have to do this all over again, and it'll cost even more money. That's a hypothetical, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Right now, today, this is your problem. I didn't bring these bugs home. I didn't create this situation. Why should I be financially responsible for fixing it? Theodora stood up abruptly and started pacing around our living room. Because we're roommates. We share this space. When one of us has a problem, it affects both of us. Her voice was getting louder and more emotional. Okay, but this isn't like splitting utilities or groceries, I said. This is a specific problem that came from your work environment and is currently contained to your personal spaces. I think the fair thing would be for you to pay for treatment of your room and car, and if the problem spreads to my area later, then we can discuss it. That's not what the pest control company recommended, she shot back. They said the whole apartment needs to be treated. Are you going to ignore professional advice just to save money? I felt my patience starting to wear thin. Actually, let me ask you something. This is the second time in 2 years that you've brought parasites home from work. Don't you think that's a pattern? Don't you think maybe you need to be more careful about contamination protocols? Theodora's face went white, then bright red. How dare you, she said quietly. I work with vulnerable populations. Sometimes exposure to these things is unavoidable. I can't control every aspect of my work environment. I'm not criticizing your work, I said, though honestly I was starting to. I'm saying that you have a responsibility to protect our shared living space. And when that protection fails, the responsibility for fixing it should be yours, not mine. We argued for another hour, going in circles. Theodora kept insisting that the pest control company's recommendation meant we should split the cost. I kept pointing out that the actual infestation was limited to her belongings and that the treatment recommendation was just a precaution. Fine, she finally said, throwing her hands up in defeat. I'll call around and see if anyone will treat just my room and the car. But if this spreads to the rest of the apartment, you're paying for everything. That's fair, I agreed, though I had serious doubts about whether she'd actually follow through on finding a more targeted solution. Over the next few days, Theodora claimed to be calling various pest control companies, but she kept coming back with the same story. Everyone says the same thing, she'd report. They won't treat just one room in an apartment. They say it's not effective and they can't guarantee the results. I started to suspect she wasn't being entirely truthful, so I decided to do my own research. I called 3 different pest control companies and asked about partial treatments. 2 of them said they could absolutely treat just specific rooms and the vehicle, though they'd recommend monitoring the rest of the apartment for any signs of spread. When I confronted Theodora with this information, she became defensive and angry. Those companies don't know our specific situation, she insisted. The ones I called have actually seen our apartment and know what we're dealing with. But Gary from Apex never said they couldn't do a partial treatment, I pointed out. He just recommended the full treatment as a precaution. Did you actually ask them about treating just your room? Theodora's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't asked because she didn't want a partial solution. She wanted me to pay half of the comprehensive treatment, whether I needed it or not. Look, I said, trying one more time to be reasonable. Let's call Apex back and specifically ask about treating just your room and car. If they say it's not possible, then we can discuss other options. No, she said firmly. I've already researched this thoroughly. The full treatment is the only responsible option, and I think you're being incredibly selfish by refusing to pay your fair share. That word, selfish, hit me like a slap in the face. Here I was, dealing with a second infestation that I had nothing to do with, and I was being called selfish for not wanting to pay for it? The injustice of it made me furious. My fair share? I repeated incredulously. Theodora, what exactly is my fair share of a problem that you created and that currently only affects your belongings? Please, explain that math to me. We live together, she shouted. Your fair share is half. That's how shared expenses work. Shared expenses are things like rent, utilities, and groceries, I shot back. This is like if you crashed your car and then asked me to pay half the repair bill because we both use the driveway. The argument escalated from there, with both of us saying things we probably shouldn't have. Theodora accused me of being unsympathetic to her work situation and not understanding the challenges she faced. I accused her of being irresponsible and trying to manipulate me into paying for her mistakes. "You know what," she finally said. "Fine. I'll pay for the whole treatment myself. But when these bugs spread to your room, and they will, don't come crying to me for help." "That's fine," I replied, though inside I was starting to worry about what would happen if the bugs did spread. Would I really expect her to pay for treatment of my space if the roles were reversed? But then I reminded myself of the key difference: I would never have brought this problem home in the first place. I would have been more careful about contamination protocols. I would have taken responsibility for preventing these situations instead of just expecting someone else to help pay for the cleanup. Theodora scheduled the treatment for the following week, paying the full $1,000 herself. The technicians came back and did intensive heat and chemical treatment of her room and car. They also set up monitoring traps in the common areas to detect any spread. For the first few days after the treatment, there was an uncomfortable tension in our apartment. Theodora barely spoke to me, and when she did, her tone was cold and clipped. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about how some people didn't understand what it meant to be supportive roommates. "I hope you're happy," she said one morning as I was making coffee. "I'm basically broke now because I had to pay for that treatment alone." "I'm sorry you're dealing with financial stress," I replied carefully. "But I still believe I made the right decision. This wasn't my responsibility." "Right," she said sarcastically. "Keep telling yourself that when you're dealing with bugs in your own room." But here's the thing: weeks passed, and no bugs appeared in my space. The monitoring traps remained empty. The treatment seemed to have worked, and the infestation really had been contained to Theodora's areas. I felt vindicated in my decision not to pay for preventative treatment I didn't need. However, the relationship between Theodora and me was permanently damaged. She continued to resent me for not splitting the cost, and I continued to resent her for bringing home parasites twice and then trying to make me pay for the consequences. Things came to a head last week when Theodora announced she was moving out at the end of our lease. "I can't live with someone who won't support me when I'm dealing with work-related challenges," she said. "I need a roommate who understands that we're a team." "I am supportive," I protested. I was understanding about the lice incident. "I didn't make you feel bad about it. But there's a difference between emotional support and financial responsibility for problems I didn't create." "You see it as problems you didn't create," she replied. "I see it as challenges that come with my chosen career, and I thought I was living with someone who respected that career." "I do respect your career," I said, frustrated by her continued attempts to frame this as a judgment about her work. "But respecting your career doesn't mean I should pay for the occupational hazards that come with it." Now she's moving out in 2 weeks, and the atmosphere in our apartment is absolutely toxic. She's been telling mutual friends that I'm selfish and unsupportive, painting herself as the victim of an unfair roommate situation. Some people seem to side with her, saying that roommates should support each other through difficult times. But I keep coming back to the same basic principle: why should I pay for a problem I didn't cause and that doesn't affect me? If Theodora worked in a dangerous job and got injured, I'd be emotionally supportive, but I wouldn't expect to pay her medical bills. If she worked with chemicals and brought home contaminated clothing, I'd be understanding, but I wouldn't pay for professional cleaning of her wardrobe. The bed bug situation feels the same to me. It's an occupational hazard of her chosen career, and while I can be sympathetic and supportive, I don't think I should be financially responsible for dealing with the consequences. Yet Theodora has me second-guessing myself. She's been so upset and angry about my refusal to pay that I'm starting to wonder if I really am being unreasonably selfish. Maybe the principle of shared living really does mean that when one person has a problem, both people should contribute to solving it, regardless of who caused it. I've been losing sleep over this, constantly questioning whether I handled the situation correctly. Part of me wonders if I should have just paid the $500 to keep the peace and maintain our friendship. After all, $500 isn't going to ruin me financially, and it might have preserved a living situation that was otherwise working well. But then I think about the precedent that would have set. If I paid for this problem, what happens the next time Theodora brings home parasites? Because based on her track record and her apparent lack of concern about prevention, there probably will be a next time. Would I be expected to pay half again? Would it become an ongoing shared expense every time her work environment contaminated our living space? I also can't shake the feeling that Theodora wasn't entirely honest about the pest control options. I found companies that would do partial treatments, but she claimed none would. I suspect she wanted the comprehensive treatment and saw an opportunity to get me to pay for half of it, even though I didn't need it. The more I think about it, the more convinced I become that I made the right decision. But the social pressure from Theodora and some of our mutual friends is intense. They keep using words like selfish and unsupportive and not understanding the challenges of her job. But here's what I keep coming back to. Understanding the challenges of someone's job is different from paying for the negative consequences of those challenges. I can be sympathetic about the fact that Theodora faces occupational hazards. I can be emotionally supportive when those hazards create problems for her. But I don't think that sympathy and support should extend to financial responsibility for problems that don't affect me. If the bed bugs had actually spread to my room, I would have absolutely contributed to the cost of treating my space. But they didn't spread. The infestation was contained to Theodora's belongings, just like the pest control company confirmed. The recommendation to treat the whole apartment was a precaution, not a necessity. I think Theodora is trying to manipulate me into feeling guilty about a reasonable boundary. She's framing my refusal to pay as a lack of support for her career and her challenges, but that's not what this is about. This is about personal responsibility and fair allocation of costs for problems that one person creates. Now I'm facing the prospect of finding a new roommate, which is stressful and expensive. I'll have to pay application fees, potentially pay higher rent if I can't find someone to split costs with, and deal with the uncertainty of living with a stranger. Part of me wonders if it would have been easier to just pay the $500 and avoid all this drama. But I keep coming back to the principle of the thing. If I had paid for this treatment, I would have been rewarding Theodora's carelessness and enabling future similar situations. I would have been establishing that occupational hazards from her job are shared expenses in our household, which doesn't seem fair or sustainable. So here I am, turning to Reddit because I genuinely need outside perspective on this situation. Am I being unreasonably selfish? Should roommates automatically split costs for problems like this, regardless of who caused them? Or was I right to refuse to pay for a bed bug treatment that I didn't need and wouldn't have needed if my roommate had been more careful about contamination protocols? I respect Theodora's work and understand that it comes with challenges. But I don't think that respect should extend to paying for the negative consequences of those challenges when they don't affect me. I think she's trying to guilt me into taking financial responsibility for her occupational hazards, and I don't think that's fair. The irony is that if she had just accepted responsibility for the problem and paid for treatment of her own spaces, we probably could have continued living together successfully. The bed bugs were contained and treatable. It was her insistence that I pay for preventative treatment I didn't need that created this conflict and ultimately destroyed our roommate relationship. Now she's moving out, telling people I'm a terrible roommate, and I'm left wondering if I made the right choice. But even with all the stress and social pressure, I still believe I did. I think personal responsibility matters, and I think there's a difference between being supportive and being financially liable for someone else's problems. What do you think? Was I wrong to refuse to split the cost of bed bug treatment for an infestation that was contained to my roommate's belongings? Should I have paid half just to keep the peace, or was I right to insist that she take full financial responsibility for a problem she brought home from work? Because honestly, I'm starting to think that the real infestation in our apartment wasn't the bed bugs, it was the toxic entitlement that made my roommate think her problems automatically became my financial responsibility. And unlike bed bugs, that kind of toxicity doesn't respond to professional treatment. Sometimes the only solution is complete removal from your living space. I just hope I never have to deal with another roommate who thinks that sharing means I pay for problems I didn't create while they reap the benefits of irresponsible behavior. Because if that's what modern roommate relationships look like, I think I'd rather live alone and pay full rent than deal with this kind of manipulation and guilt tripping ever again.